I heard her voice before I saw her face, and what she said stopped my blood cold. 21 years I have waited for this night. Tonight, these children will burn, and I will live forever. My name is Arjun. I was a prince. And the night I stumbled into that forest, I had no idea I was walking straight into the darkest thing I would ever witness in my life. It started simply enough. My father, King Adaiban, ruled Shandampur with a gentle hand and a fearless heart. He had 2 children, me and my sister Lada. I had inherited his courage. Lada had inherited something rarer: wisdom. Between the 2 of us, we made a reasonable team. But on the morning this story truly begins, neither of us knew what was waiting on the other side of a forest road. My father came to me before I could leave for a hunting trip and said, "Not today, Arjun." I tried to argue. Hunting was the one thing that quieted the noise in my head, especially after our mother had died. The palace without her felt like a house that had forgotten how to breathe. But my father looked at me with tired eyes and said, "Your sister hasn't left her room in weeks. Go to Ratangarh. Take her with you. Let her remember that the world is still out there." I looked across the courtyard at Lada. She was standing at a distance, staring at nothing, her shoulders carrying a grief that was too heavy for someone her age. She was 13. She should have been laughing. I went to her and said, "Come on, we're leaving." She blinked. "Where?" "Away," I said. "That's enough for now." She almost smiled. Almost. We rode through the jungle road toward Ratangarh, the neighboring kingdom ruled by my father's old friend, King Surya Pratap. The journey was quiet but not uncomfortable, the kind of silence that exists between people who don't need to fill every moment with words. Lada stared at the trees as we rode, and I could see something softening in her face. The forest had that effect on people. It reminded you that the world was older and larger than your pain. Then we reached Ratangarh, and something was wrong. I noticed it immediately. The streets were full, but only with old people. Bent backs, slow steps, gray hair as far as I could see. Not a single young face anywhere. No children running. No young men working. No young women at the market. Just the elderly, moving through their day with the quiet resignation of people who had accepted something terrible. Lada noticed it the same moment I did. She leaned over to me and said, "Arjun, where is everyone?" I stopped my horse beside an old man and asked him directly. He looked at me with sudden terror in his eyes, the kind of fear that goes deeper than a single bad experience, and he whispered, "Be quiet. If it hears that a young person is here, it will come back. Leave. Leave now while you still can." "Who?" I pressed. "Who will come back?" But he turned and walked away without another word. I tried 2 more people. The same reaction. Closed faces. Frightened eyes. Silence. Whatever had happened here, it had broken something in these people. Not just their bodies. Their will. We went to the palace. The gates were barely guarded. Inside, King Surya Pratap was pacing his own throne room like a man waiting for an execution. When he saw us, he didn't look relieved. He looked terrified. "Arjun," he said, gripping my arm. "Why are you here? You need to leave. Both of you. Right now." "What happened?" I asked. "Tell me everything." He sat down. His hands were shaking. He told us about a demon named Danch, a creature of pure darkness who had walked into this palace weeks ago and demanded, to marry Ratangarh's beloved princess, Nirmala. Danch was ancient evil. He had spent centuries collecting darkness the way others collect treasure. And Nirmala, pure, brave, kind Nirmala, possessed something he had always lacked: genuine goodness. He believed that by joining his darkness to her light, he would become something no force in the world could stop. King Surya Pratap had refused. He had drawn his sword, and Danch had simply laughed and turned that same sword's energy back on him. Then, as punishment, Danch had swept his own cursed blade across Ratangarh. Every young person in the kingdom, soldiers, farmers, mothers, children, had aged 50 years in a single night. A kingdom full of young lives, stolen in a moment of petty cruelty. And then he had taken Nirmala. The king's voice broke when he said her name. I stood there absorbing this, and I felt the familiar thing rise in my chest. Not fear, but the slow, hot burn of someone who has decided that a wrong must be corrected, whatever the cost. Then Lotta tugged my sleeve. She leaned to my ear and said something quietly. I looked at her. Are you sure? I asked. Yes, she said. He can make young people old, but he can't make an old person older. Go in disguise, Arjun. Dress as an old man. He won't see through it. 13 years old, thinking clearly when no one else could. I found an old man's clothes. I bent my back, slowed my steps, changed my walk. Then I went alone into the jungle in the direction the king had pointed, toward the mountain peak where Danch made his home. I found him exactly as I had been told, sitting before a fire pit on a mountain peak, chanting into the flames, his body enormous and wrong-shaped in the shadows, his face something that I refuse to describe in detail because some images, once described, cannot be unseen. Before him, hanging in the air, was a cage made of nothing I could name, not iron, not wood, and inside it was a young woman sitting with her knees pulled to her chest. Her eyes were open. She was not crying. That was the thing that struck me most about Nirmala. Even trapped, even alone, she had not broken. I stepped forward in my disguise and played the role. I praised Danch. I flattered him with the exaggerated reverence of an old pujari who had waited years to stand in the presence of true power. He was suspicious. Demons always are, but vanity is a universal weakness. He listened. I told him I knew why the princess hadn't agreed to marry him. I told him I knew a solution, a golden book, filled with ancient words, kept in a golden lake deep in the forest. Words that could change any heart, words that could amplify any power. He looked at me with those terrible eyes and said, "Then bring it." "First," I said carefully, "allow me a moment with the princess. There is information I need from her. Sacred knowledge that will help me retrieve the book more safely." He stared at me for a long time. Then he waved his hand. I walked to the cage. I crouched beside it, and I spoke quickly and quietly. "Princess Nirmala, I am Arjun, son of Adaiban of Shandampur. Your father sent me." She looked at me, really looked at me, through the disguise, through the fear, measuring everything in a single glance. Then she said, "You need to leave before he realizes what you are." "I'm not leaving without you," I said. "Tell me how to stop him." She hesitated for only a moment. Then she told me, The cage suppressed her powers completely. If I could get her out of the cage, she could face Danch. But to open the cage, I needed the golden book. Its light, reflected against the bars, would dissolve them. And to destroy Danch entirely, I needed sacred water. She knew where it came from. She told me. I stood up. I told Danch I was going for the book. He watched me walk away with his terrible eyes and said nothing. I moved through the forest quickly, dropping the old man's shuffle the moment I was out of his sight. The jungle at night was a different creature than the jungle by day. The sounds changed. The shadows moved differently. And then, maybe 2 hours into my walk, I heard something that stopped me entirely. Children. Screaming. I pressed myself behind a tree and looked. In a clearing lit by firelight, a woman sat beneath a spreading tree. She was dressed in dark robes, her hair tangled, her expression calm in a way that was far more frightening than anger would have been. A man was dragging a small child toward her. The child was maybe 6 years old, fighting with every bit of strength that tiny body possessed. A woman ran from the shadows and fell at the robed woman's feet. "Chinlika, please," she begged. "That is my child, my only child. Take my life instead. Take everything I have. Just let him go." The robed woman, Chinlika, looked down at her with something close to amusement. "What would I do with your life, foolish woman? It is the child's heart I need." I felt ice move through me. I found out the rest from a man hiding in the shadows nearby, someone I nearly walked into in the dark. He pulled me behind a tree and spoke in frantic whispers. Chinlika was a devotee of darkness. For 21 years, she had been preparing for this specific night, this precise alignment of moon and shadow, when the sacrifice of 11 children's hearts would grant her immortality. She had been collecting them, one by one, over weeks. Tonight was the night she intended to complete the ritual. "There must be a way to stop her," I said. The man looked at me like I was either brave or insane. Probably both. He told me about an ancient neem tree in an abandoned cemetery called Ratangarh, a tree thousands of years old. Branches from that tree, thrown over Chinlika, would end her. "Has anyone ever come back from Ratangarh?" I asked. The man's silence was my answer. "Tell me where it is," I said. I left before he could argue. Ratangarh was not far in distance. But distance in a cursed place measures differently. The cemetery appeared out of the dark like something that had always been there, waiting. Iron gates rusted half open, stones tilting at wrong angles, the air carrying a smell like old rain and something older underneath. The gate moved when I touched it, and the moment it opened, she appeared. She was not what I expected. She was translucent, not solid, not entirely there, and her eyes were the eyes of someone who had been alone for an incredibly long time. She said she would drink my blood. She said she hadn't tasted any in months. She said I was the first living person to come here in longer than she could remember. I held out my arm. "Take what you need," I said, "but leave enough. I have children to save and a demon to stop before morning." She stared at my outstretched arm. Then she stared at my face. And something changed behind her eyes, something I can only describe as the look of someone who has been treated like a monster for so long they've forgotten they were once something else. She stepped aside. "The tree is at the center," she said quietly. "Take what you need, and go quickly." I went in. I found the tree, ancient and enormous, its bark silver gray in the moonlight, its branches spreading like arms that had been reaching for something for centuries. I took several branches, careful and fast, and I ran. The forest was louder when I returned to Chinlika's clearing. She had the child in her arms now. Her man was holding a knife out to her. She took it. She was raising it. I threw the branches. They hit her across her shoulders and she screamed, a sound that was not entirely human, and then she burned. Not slowly, not gradually. She simply became fire, then ash, then nothing. Her men collapsed where they stood. The cage of dark energy she had built around those children, some invisible architecture of ritual and cruelty, shattered like glass that had been waiting for permission to break. The children ran to their mothers. The mothers held them without words. And for a moment, that dark clearing was the most human place I had ever stood in. Pure relief, pure love, pure release. The village elder came to me with tears running down his face and clasped my hands. He said his people owed me a debt they could never repay. Just tell me where the Golden Lake is, I said. He told me. He warned me it would try to tempt me. He said the lake's magic tested the person who entered it. It would offer power, offer glory, offer kingdoms, and if I accepted, the book would never come to me. I understand, I said, and I went. The lake appeared just before dawn. In the early gray light, its surface shimmered gold. Not like ordinary gold, but like sunlight stored inside water, warm and alive. I stepped in. The water pulled me down, but not violently, more like an invitation than a grip. And suddenly I was inside. It was a palace. Vast. Luminous. Full of beauty the way dreams are full of beauty. Overwhelming and slightly wrong at the edges. A queen sat on a throne of pale stone. Avantika. She was extraordinary, the kind of person whose presence makes you forget, momentarily, what you came for. She looked at me with knowing eyes and said I had entered without permission and could be sentenced to death. I told her why I had come. I told her about Nirmala, about Ratangarh, about the people whose youth had been stolen, and a demon who thought he could claim goodness by force. She studied me for a long time. Then she led me to a doorway. If the book chooses you, she said, it is yours. Inside that doorway, the voices started immediately. They came from everywhere and nowhere. Why are you doing this for her? Stay here. Avantika's kingdom is yours if you want it. Power like you've never imagined. I kept walking. Take the book for yourself. You could rule the world. Think of what you could do. I put my hands over my ears. Not because the voices were loud, because part of me, the small, tired human part, wanted to listen. And I knew that if I let that part speak first, I would fail. I don't want the world, I said to the empty corridor. I want to go home. Light exploded around me. When it faded, the book was on a stone pedestal in front of me. Golden letters on a golden cover, warm to the touch, humming faintly like something alive. I picked it up and walked back out. Avantika smiled when she saw me. A good heart finds the book, she said. A greedy one wanders those corridors forever. She pressed a small bottle into my other hand. Crystal clear water inside, catching light from no visible source. Tell Nirmala to use this. She will know what to do. I ran back to Dansh's mountain. He was still at his fire when I arrived. His eyes opened when he heard my footsteps. I held the book up so the morning sun caught it, and I angled it deliberately, precisely, so that the reflected light hit the bars of Nirmala's cage at exactly the angle a 13-year-old girl had calculated it would need to. The cage disappeared. Nirmala stood up. The air around her changed the moment she was free. I felt it, physically, like a pressure releasing. She looked at me. I threw her the bottle. She caught it without a word, turned, and looked at Danch with the calm of someone who has been waiting a very long time for this exact moment. Danch rose. He was enormous against the morning sky. He opened his mouth, and the sound that came out was something I felt in my teeth. "Betrayal," he roared. "You dare." Nirmala opened the bottle and threw the water across him in a single, smooth arc. What happened next was not dramatic in the way I expected. There was no explosion, no thunder. Danch simply came apart. He clutched himself. He shook. He fell to his knees in the dirt, this ancient, terrible thing, and then he burned from the inside out, quietly, the way a lie dissolves when the truth finally arrives. Nothing left but ash and smoke and the faint smell of something that had been wrong for a very long time. Nirmala handed me the golden book. "Keep it safe until we reach the palace," she said. We walked back to Ratangarh together, and as we passed through the gates, we heard the first sound that told us it was over. Voices. Young voices. Laughter. Somewhere in the city, a child was running. The curse had broken with Danch. The people of Ratangarh were themselves again. Young faces in the morning light, blinking like they'd woken from a nightmare and couldn't quite believe the world was still there. Some of them were crying. Some were just standing in the sun with their eyes closed, feeling it. King Surya Pratap met us at the palace gate. He held me for a long time without speaking, the way men hold on when words would make the moment smaller. Then he stepped back and wiped his eyes and looked at his daughter. Nirmala looked back at him with steady eyes. Then she turned to me. "My father showed me your portrait once," she said, "before all of this, when he first suggested a possible alliance between our kingdoms. I said no then." A pause. "I was wrong. I would like to reconsider." Her father made a sound that was half laugh and half sob. He turned to his minister immediately and began talking about preparations. I stood there in the morning light, holding a golden book, covered in forest mud, wearing pieces of an old man's disguise, and I thought about how strange and winding the road had been to reach this particular sunrise. I thought about my sister Lotta, back at Ratangarh's palace with the king's guards, probably already calculating what had happened based on some signal she had devised and I hadn't noticed. 13 years old and the sharpest mind in any room she entered. It was her idea that had gotten me through the door. It was always going to be her idea. And I thought about my mother, gone from us now, and how she used to say that goodness was not a quality you were born with, it was a practice. A daily choice. Something you had to pick up again every morning, especially on the mornings when it was hardest. The witch Tanika had spent 21 years building toward a single night of terrible power. She had stolen children. She had terrorized families. She had made herself into something monstrous in pursuit of living forever. She burned in seconds. Danch had spent centuries collecting darkness. He had destroyed a kingdom. He had taken a princess and held the entire region hostage to his cruelty. He believed that power meant the right to reach out and take whatever you wanted. He dissolved like smoke. They had both made the same mistake. They had looked at the world and seen only what they could extract from it, what they could take, what they could use. And they had spent so long taking that they had forgotten, or perhaps never known, that the only things worth having are the things you earn by giving something of yourself first. I gave an old witch my arm in the dark, and she let me pass. I gave up a kingdom and a queen and the promise of power, and the book came to me. A princess sat in a cage for weeks and refused to break, and when the door finally opened, she needed only a single moment to finish what I had started. Some victories are long. Some are slow. Some ask you to walk through cemeteries in the dark and stand in magical corridors while voices tell you to be selfish. Some ask you to bend your back and limp through a demon's mountain and pretend to be someone you're not, just long enough to get close enough to help. But they all begin the same way, with a choice. With one person deciding that someone else's suffering is not acceptable and that they are willing to pay whatever the cost is to make it stop. I was a prince. That morning I was something else. Something that doesn't have a title. And that, I think, was the beginning of becoming who I was actually meant to be.